My name is Jim Lumsden. I'm a first-year PhD student at the University of Bristol. So I apologise if I haven't got a wealth of data to show you, like a lot of the other talks we've seen today, but hopefully I have some interesting ideas. And perhaps, unsurprisingly for this conference, I'm going to talk about cognitive assessment. So, dare I say, in a room full of people who love cognitive tests, that we've known for a long time cognitive tasks are far from perfect. From the participant's perspective, these tests look simplistic, they're very repetitive, they're often frustratingly difficult, and frankly they take a long time to deliver. And so overall, from the participant's perspective, this is quite boring. Now, from our perspective, we need these limitations because we're striving for task purity. We're just trying to measure the one cognitive domain of interest. But today I'm going to present some ideas and some evidence that suggests there might be a way to overcome these limitations without invalidating your cognitive task. And that way is gamification. So gamification is a bit of a buzzword that appeared in around 2009. And essentially what it means is taking things that are commonly found in computer games, things like points and badges, level, gameplay, and translocating them into activities and situations that aren't that intrinsically interesting in order to make them more motivating. And so a really good example of gamification is Wii Fit. Wii Fit took something which is on its own fairly boring, getting fit in your living room, and tried to make it more engaging by tracking your progress, by letting you challenge your friends, by giving you points and feedback and achievements for your work. But gamification doesn't just have to be applied on games consoles and with fancy graphics. In 2012, Photoshop gamified their tutorial process. For all of those users who tried to use Photoshop and got stuck because, frankly, the learning curve is quite steep, those are users that Adobe was losing. So they reframed their tutorial process to include missions and challenges. So rather than just learning how to crop a photo, you'd be given a quest by an editor of a big newspaper, and he'd say, you need to take these 3 people out the side of the frame and do it in 15 minutes. And so just a little bit of reframing of the task can give much more meaning to why you're doing it. That can provide that intrinsic motivation. And gamification has been used in loads of scenarios. It's been used for marketing, it's been used in health monitoring, it's been used for fitness monitoring, and it's even been used to help you brush your teeth properly. So why would psychology be interested in gamification? Well, the primary reason is increasing engagement. Computer games are immensely popular. Millions of people play computer games every day. And I implied at the beginning that if our cognitive tasks are difficult to engage with, then perhaps by making them more motivating, we might be able to hold participants' attention better, and that might improve the validity of the data which we're gathering. And this is particularly important for certain patient groups which are difficult to engage with, say children or people with ADHD. And there's also been quite a lot of talk earlier today about long-term monitoring, the need for repeated measurement. Imagine if your cognitive battery was actually quite entertaining. It might be easier to convince people to come back for that second and third and fifth session. Now I know that I'm hardly the first psychologist who's been interested in adding game mechanics to their cognitive task. And I could stand here all day and give you a massive literature review of everything which has been done, but I figure given I only have 10 minutes, I should probably tell you about stuff which I've been doing. So in order to be successful, a gamified cognitive task has to do 2 things. Firstly, it has to still be a valid measure of the cognitive domain of interest. There's no point going to all of that effort to make your task fun, to make it more like a game, if you don't really measure what you're intending to measure in the first place. And secondly, it has to be more enjoyable. Likewise, there's no point going to all that effort if actually it's not any more fun. And so I've recently run a validation study looking to answer or check whether these 2 questions hold on a newly developed prototype gamified task developed by Cambridge Cognition. And that task is called Manu. And I compared it against the CANTAB counterpart, the stop signal task, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So I compared it in 104 people, both played both tasks, and they also subjectively reviewed how much they enjoyed it. So you can see here the 2 tasks. On the left is the stop signal task. I'm sure many of you know exactly what it looks like. You have a response arrow in the middle of the screen, a stimulus arrow in the middle of the screen, you have 2 response locations, and a rather inhuman beep that tells you when you have to inhibit your response. And that's pretty much all you have. On the right side of the screen is Manu. Now, Manu already looks kind of more exciting. You have this friendly-looking character in the middle of the screen, you have explosions, you have a progress bar. And so when the player opens up Manu, the narrator introduces the character and says, Manu wants to play a high-fiving game. And Manu puts his hand into the different corners of the screen, like this, and the participant has to respond as fast as they possibly can. And you can see that responding to Manu's high five as fast as they can is exactly the same as the choice reaction time task in the SST. Now, in some trials, Manu puts out his hand, and this little fairy appears in front of his palm, and the narrator cries out, wait, don't high-five Manu while his friend's in the way, or you'll crush him. And so you can see how just a little bit of reframing, the introduction of two characters, the introduction of some graphics, can turn something like the stop signal task, which you can do but doesn't make much sense, into something which has a reason for why you're performing all these actions. And the addition of these graphics and progress bar might make it more enjoyable to participants. Well, I say they might make it more enjoyable to participants. They did improve their enjoyment. So we asked people to subjectively review their enjoyment of the two tasks, and we found people said that Manu was more enjoyable, they found it less difficult to concentrate on, and they felt they performed better on the task. Now, we did find they said both tasks were equally boring and equally frustrating, which isn't that surprising. Both tasks are stop signal tasks. Stop signal tasks feature a tracking algorithm, which means that the participant is converged to a 50% failure rate on their inhibitions, and 50% is quite high, and I think people find that quite frustrating. So that might just be the nature of the task. But scientifically, objectively speaking, despite the introduction of all of these graphics and the characters, there seems quite good evidence that Manu is measuring inhibition in the same way as the CANTAB stop signal task. Once you account for primary task reaction time, you can see the shape of these two inhibition curves is really quite similar. So that's pretty good evidence that they're both picking up people's inhibition in the same way. And the SSRTs produced by both tasks are also fairly similar. Manu's are slightly more variable, and I think this is due to the device that the task was delivered on. But as a pilot experiment, it's a pretty good indication that gamification can produce results that are both valid and also a task that is more enjoyable to participants. So, what's next? Having written up a paper on Manu and the standard stop signal task, and also done a rather large literature review on gamified cognitive tasks and cognitive training in psychological research, I've noticed that gamification has been applied rather haphazardly so far in psychology. It seems that researchers think, a task is a bit boring and we're trying to deal with a difficult audience, let's throw in some points and some graphics and hopefully it'll improve things. But it doesn't seem, there's only a few papers that have really looked at the specific effects of game mechanics on the data we're gathering, because we really need to understand what these game mechanics are doing to our data before we start using gamified tests, otherwise it makes our data difficult to interpret. So a study which I'm planning on running when I get back to university in a few weeks is a very, very simple study that takes a go-no-go task and has two other conditions with game mechanics in them. So the standard no-game condition is a very, very ordinary go-no-go task, categorization go-no-go task, where you see an organic object and you have to respond as fast as possible, and you see an inorganic object and you have to inhibit your response. Nothing too unusual. There's also a points condition, which looks very similar, but participants are rewarded points for responding as fast as they can, and they get a streak of bonus points the more times they are correct in a row. The third condition is interested in narrative scaffolding. And so it pictures the player as the lone sheriff in a town overrun by cowboys, and these cowboys have holed up in a local saloon and taken some people hostage. And so you stand outside the saloon, and when villainous cowboys appear in the door, you have to respond as fast as possible. You've got to shoot first. It is, after all, a Western shootout. Sometimes innocent hostages appear in the door, and when that happens, you have to withhold your response. So mechanically, it's exactly the same as a go-no-go task, but there is that affective difference. Rather than just accidentally responding when you see an inorganic object, you've got the risk of potentially shooting someone innocent, and you have the perhaps thrill of engaging in a dangerous situation. And stimuli like this probably will have a dramatic effect on data, or at least an effect on data, but they're surprisingly common in gamified psychological research, and they're also surprisingly common in computer games. So I think we really need to understand actually what that's doing to our data. But regardless of the results of that study, I think that gamification is going to play an important role in cognitive research going forward. Imagine that we could, well, with a good understanding of what makes things fun, and with a good understanding of what those mechanics have on the effects those mechanics have on our data, we might be able to design really engaging cognitive tests that just played like games, but at the same time measured your cognition, built up a picture of what's going on. And this, like I said, would allow us to perform much, much easier research with children, easier research with ADHD people, ADHD patients, and it really might help with longitudinal monitoring. So over the last 5-10 years, we've seen smartphones begin to become physical health monitoring devices. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see smartphones become mental health monitoring devices also. And at the peak of its success, many people woke up in the morning and played Angry Birds, and it happened for months and months. Imagine if all of that engagement was channeled into repeated testing. The potential for research would be enormous, and it would be also useful for diagnosis. And so I think as psychology moves out of the laboratory and onto personal computers and onto mobile devices, engagement with our tests is going to be the key to producing good data. And now gamification is just one of the tools which I think will help address that motivational problem. But I think it's a pretty good one, so I think it's worth continuing researching. Thank you very much.